former Supreme Court Justice Louise Arbour has been named Canada's next Governor-General. The 79-year-old will be the King's representative in Canada and also serve as the country's Commander-in-Chief. Now, some of the GG's main responsibilities. Arbour's appointment is Prime Minister Mark Carney's most high-profile selection since taking office. At the announcement earlier, Carney spoke about national unity and why he chose Louise Arbour for this role. Take a listen.
Louise Arbour has held nearly every office a Canadian jurist can hold, and several that no Canadian has held before. She has been recognized with nearly 100 honours and awards, including 42 honorary doctorates from universities around the world. She's a companion of the Order of Canada, our country's highest civilian honour. But the measure of her career is neither in the offices she has held nor the awards she's received. It's in the lives she has changed through her service.
And the CBC's Janice McGregor was watching that announcement in our nation's capital. She joins us now live. So Janice, how did the Prime Minister explain his pick?
Well, it was really interesting to hear him talk about the long CV that she's packing as she prepares to take up residence at Rideau Hall. This is an individual with a career so distinguished that there is an elementary school in this town already that's been named after her. The Prime Minister talked today about how her past work, of course, matters in and of itself, but it also tells us something about what she's going to bring. The conviction that institutions are the load-bearing walls of civil society, Mark Carney said, and that these institutions are going to remain trustworthy only so long as people hold them accountable. And he talked about the various examples of this through her career. Of course, the person now taking up the crown here in Canada, the act of representing it, is taking that job from the perspective of someone who considered Canada's constitutional monarchy as a jurist for 5 years on the Supreme Court. Before that, she was known on the world stage as a prosecutor at the International Criminal Tribunal, where she went after justice for war crimes committed in the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. She left Canada's top bench then to take up roles at the United Nations as the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Special Representative for International Migration. And we're also going to now get used to the idea of seeing her in Canadian Armed Forces uniforms as sort of the ceremonial head of the military. It's worth remembering in that context that she also led a very important inquiry into misconduct in the ranks of Canada's forces. So a legal expert, someone passionate about human rights, bilingue, bien sûr, the Prime Minister no doubt hoping to put past controversies in the rearview mirror about her predecessor's lack of fluency in French. But what's going to be most interesting, perhaps, is her approach to the job. And here's where some past criticisms of her as a jurist, for example, are going to be so interesting. Today she was asked about people who did not like her, saw her as a constitutional activist on the bench. Also, the fact that she had served at the UN, an institution whose credibility sometimes is called into question. And of course, we all know the national unity debates and how fraught they can be in this country. Here's how she fielded those questions.
We live in a country where there's a great free space for expression of contrary views, even at times expressed in very robust fashion. And I have immense respect for that process. I will reach out not only to those who agree with me. The kind of cheerleading mode, I think, is not always conducive to change and to progress. I will reach out to anybody who wishes to engage with me, to debate, to discuss. I will listen, and I hope in due course that I will manage to persuade those, particularly those who may doubt my integrity.
It is the responsibility of the Governor-General to somehow try to embody what this country represents, to engage with people in their ceremonies at their best, but also sometimes their worst moments. She's going to need to straddle the need to stand above partisan politics, notwithstanding the fact that it has been practiced by members of her own family, her daughter, former NDP candidate in past campaigns. But she's also going to need to be able to demonstrate that she can wield intellectual wisdom if called upon, while being relatable to average folks as she meets them across the country. Not an easy gig. She said she's going to be reflecting on how best to do it in the weeks between now and her installation.
Not an easy gig. Okay, so let's talk about the challenges that may lie ahead for Louise Arbour as she prepares to assume this role.
Yeah, I was struck by how both the Governor General designate and the Prime Minister today talked about institutions at this moment when we are thinking so much about the health of Canada's democracy and democracies around the world and the importance of the rule of law. A change in GG often reignites debates about the future of the monarchy in this country. And of course, we could be looking at not just one, but two provinces where there could be a sovereignty referendum in the future. She raised some questions about how she's going to tackle that today. And in that vein, I want to play you a bit of tape about how the Bloc Québécois leader, Yves-François Blanchet, reacted to Carney's pick this morning.
I must admit that even if there are some issues about which I would not agree with Madame Arbour, I have the utmost respect for that woman. It doesn't change the fact that monarchy and democracy, monarchy and taking care of the most vulnerable people on earth are hardly compatible. But the person is someone which deserves all respect.
And finally, you know, as Mary Simon prepares to move out of Rideau Hall, of course, the first Indigenous Governor General, we still need to keep in mind the both historic but also current living special relationship between the Crown and Indigenous peoples. These are issues, questions that Louise Arbour engaged with when she sat on the Supreme Court for a number of very important cases about Indigenous rights. She is now going to be embodying the Crown at the heart of these discussions.
Janice, thank you for this. That's the CBC's Janice McGregor in Ottawa. So now, as we mentioned before, the next Governor General is fully bilingual in English and French. The current Governor General faced controversy for her inability to speak French. So how important is that? Let's stay on this story and bring in Geneviève Tellier in Gatineau, Quebec. She is a political science professor at the University of Ottawa. Okay, so first let's start with what you make of this selection.
I think it's a perfect pick. We heard just before of Yves-François Blanchet talking about he has utmost respect for Louise Arbour, and I think that will be the same for most Quebecers, and so she is held in high regard. We know her for many years. She has performed various tasks, duties without any controversy, and so for that reason, I think everybody will agree it's an excellent choice. And also, as you mentioned, she speaks French, which was also top of the concern for many Quebecers for the next Governor General.
When we think about what we heard from the Prime Minister as he introduced her, what message do you believe he was trying to send about this appointment?
I think he picked someone that represents the core value esteemed by Canadians. Louise Arbour was a former Supreme Court justice. She was also a High Commissioner in the United Nations for Human Rights. And so protecting, defending human rights, I think that is one value that is held in high esteem in Canada in general, all across the country. And I think he wanted to pick someone that embraced that represent that. A stability also, if you have listened to Louise Arbour this morning, she has a calm tone. She is reassuring. I think that could be also an asset for many people in those turbulent times. She embodies also the main institution of Canada, so democracy, justice, human rights, as I said before. And for all those reasons, I think, yes, she is kind of representing what Mark Carney wants for Canada and where we want to bring us in the future for the coming years with Madame Arbour.
You know, when we listened to the Prime Minister as he began his remarks, he talked about Canada's foundation being built in three parts, you know, with Indigenous, with French culture and with English culture as well, and all three coming together. We talk a lot about the criticism that, of course, Mary Simon received, but we know that while she was not fluent in French, she did speak Inuktitut. So I'm wondering how critical that was in terms of her historic appointment, being the first Indigenous person in this role, speaking an Indigenous language, and also focusing in on reconciliation, and whether or not that legacy will be carried forward with this new appointment.
To see if it will be carried forward, we'll see. We'll have to wait and see what Louise Arbour will do. Now, I think that many in Quebec do agree, yes, that was an important event that Mary Simon was appointed because of all the historical component of having an Indigenous person at the helm of the state. That was important. But at the same time, I would say that for many Quebecers, it was a missed opportunity because those three aspects were not present. And so you have Indigenous culture plus the English culture plus the French culture, and you had only 2 out of 3. And so one was missing, and it was nonetheless possible to find somebody that would represent all those 3 cultures. And many have criticized the choice at the time, saying that it would have been possible to find an Indigenous person that would speak the 2 official language of Canada, English and French, plus another language, First Nation language, that would have been possible. So for that reason, there was some kind of skepticism, I would say, in Quebec, or disappointment, not having embraced the moment and sought somebody that would have better represented this integration, I would say, or those 3 elements would be present together. And so I think that's the main criticism that many in Quebec have towards Mary Simons, not necessarily the person, but the fact that French was relegated as a secondary aspect, while it should have been preeminent for such a position, because we're talking about the head of state of a bilingual country, bilingual meaning French and English for the moment.
Finally, I wanted to ask you, in terms of the moment that we're in right now and the role of the Governor General as a potentially unifying force, sovereignty is perhaps a big theme right now when we watch what is happening in Alberta and questions about whether or not there should be independence there, as we watch what's happening in Quebec with a provincial election coming up, which may put independence as well as at the forefront. And then finally, when we watch the threats coming from south of the border to this country in general, and messages that have been subtly sent from the King. So what role does the King's representative play when it comes to sovereignty on all these levels?
Usually doesn't play a major role. And go back to this 2 referendum that we have had in the past, we did not see the Governor General active on that file. But nonetheless, it does represent the unity of the country. The Governor General, Louise Arbour, will probably do something if the Prime Minister asks her to do something. But usually you try to keep neutral at the same time, and even this morning, Louise Arbour said, I'm the voice of all Canadians. And so even though those who do represent opposite opinion. And so it's kind of a very delicate balance to come to. But nonetheless, I do not expect her to be heard that much on that front. Perhaps many would like to hear her a bit more on that, but she has a reserve position and she should be neutral. And we'll see what the Prime Minister will ask her to do, because the Governor General is at the service of the Prime Minister. And so she wouldn't have her own, take her own initiative on that file. And she should at least, and that would be important, at least not to start a controversy that would be more damaging than anything else. So basically, I do not expect her to be heard that much on that file, except if the Prime Minister asks her to do so.
I want to thank you for your time today and for your insights, Geneviève.
Thank you very much.
That is political science professor from the University of Ottawa, Geneviève Tellier. Thank you.